Hi, I'm Jessica Bika, and I did my movie video on a Resistance. So here's the director and cast. The director is Xiao Mingyo. It's worth noting that he also goes by Joe Minho, just due to the fact that he has the name of a very popular K-pop idol to make it easier to find him. And he doesn't have many other noteworthy movies. He's only released around 3 or 4 other movies besides this one. The lead actress is Go Sun. There's a lot of secondary characters due to the fact that it's set in a prison and she has a lot of prison cellmates. But it would be too many to list, and they're not really that important due to the fact that the story focuses predominantly on her character. The release date for this movie is February 27, 2019. So here's the synopsis. A very basic synopsis of the movie is in 1919, a 17-year-old schoolgirl is thrown in prison for leading protests against the Japanese. Movie is based on the real life girl of Yoon Gwon-sun, and it's a predominantly black and white movie with featuring flashbacks in color. And the movie location is predominantly set in Sodongmun prison. And so in this movie, you kind of see her life based in the prison. There's some flashbacks where it kind of shows her before her life in prison, but it's predominantly shows her life in prison. And she only got in prison because she was leading protests against the Japanese, as the synopsis says. But in these protests, she was kind of predominantly leading them, but also her parents sadly got killed in the protest. And so also in the movie, you can kind of see her reminisce about her family life because she sadly does not have a direct blood family anymore. And also in the prison, in the moments in the prison, you can see her still protesting against the Japanese because she still does Korean cries for liberation and makes the other joins in. And due to all these things that she kind of does to go against the Japanese in prison, she gets badly punished for these acts. And they even try to get the other women cellmates to turn against her. Some other women cellmates are pregnant, and so they kind of lead them into a room like, hey, we'll give you apper and like protect your baby, kind of. Just say who kind of started the cries. And so due to the fact that they want their baby to be safe and they don't want to get into harm's way, they say Yoon Gwon-sun's name, and she badly gets punished for her acts. And at the end of the movie, she sadly passes away due to the harm to her body. And that's basically it. She's the only one that was still in the prison during this time. Everybody else got released, but she kind of refused to leave to protest farther. And she was able to gather people her age to protest. And so this more historical background for the movie. As I said before, the movie is based on Yugun-sun. She is a predominant figure in the movie, and most of what happens in the movie happens in her actual life. And so, for background on the actual movement that she helped lead, is that these protests began on March 1st, but the Japanese could not stop these protests until 2 months later. And a large number of people participate in these protests. So there was approximately 2 million Koreans that participated in more than 1,000 plus demonstrations, and these demonstrations were peaceful, but they were still badly harmed even though they were peaceful. Around 7,000 people were killed, 6,000 were wounded, 715 private houses, 47 churches, and 2 school buildings were destroyed by fire. Approximately 46,000 people were arrested, and only of those 46,000, 10,000 were tried and convicted. So that's a very large number of people that participated. It wasn't a very like small regional movement like, oh yeah, I don't like the Japanese. It was a very big thing overall in Korea. Sadly, this movement didn't really cause international countries to kind of learn more about Japanese occupation in Korea. It did, however, lead to the birth of the Korean Provisional Government in Shanghai, which later on If you, as you read through history, you'll find out that they kind of played a big part in international countries learning more about the Japanese occupation in Korea. And this is a very big movement in Korea, so it's now a national holiday in both South and North Korea. And due to Yu Guan-sung's actions, she now has a shrine and is remembered as a big heroine of this protest. So what I learned is I learned overall about the Japanese occupation in Korea. I wasn't very knowledgeable about this before. In my school system, we weren't taught about Asian history, specifically Korean history, to for me to know about this. So this is my first time kind of hearing about it and its effects and how much Japanese kind of took over Korea and kind of harmed Koreans' lives. And I also learned how brave Koreans were during this time. You know, there's not many times in history where you can be like, oh, we all stood up against something. And so it was during this time of Japanese occupation that a lot of Koreans were able to stand up and protest, even though they might get in harm's way. The only other example I have of this is kind of in America when back in the day people were protesting against the British. Um, and so it was very amazing to see how brave Koreans were during this time and also the woman's role during this time. It's very impressive to see a very young woman like her kind of be a predominant figure in these movements. And she was only 16, 17 around this time, and she was willing to give her life for this movement and still wanted to be heard. And so I highly recommend The Resistance if you haven't seen it. I know some people, when they think of a black and white movie or they see one, they're like, oh, this is super old, it's going to be super boring. This movie is not that. The director purposely even chose to have the movie in black and white, even though it's made in 2019, like I said, to display the pains of emotions that the actors face. And so you can really kind of feel their emotion more. And the dynamic between the flashbacks and the black and white is really beautiful to see. And so I highly recommend it and other Korean movies if you haven't seen it. Thank you.